In the mid-19th century, a gripping saga unfolded across the vast landscapes of the American West. A tale etched in history as the Snake War from 1864 to 1868. This was no ordinary conflict. It was an irregular war waged by the United States of America against the elusive Snake Indians, a moniker assigned by settlers to the northern Paiute, Bannock, and the western Shoshone bands residing along the serpentine bends of the Snake River. The battleground sprawled across the rugged states of Oregon, Nevada, and California, as well as the untamed expanses of the Idaho Territory. The toll of this tumultuous struggle was marked by a grim count of 1,762 casualties, fallen soldiers, wounded warriors, and captives, all bearing witness to the relentless clash between two worlds. The roots of this conflict burrowed deep into the soil of increasing tension between native tribes and settlers encroaching on ancestral lands. A narrative unfolded over several years where explorers passing through were trying to have minimal impact, or maybe massive impact, but the brewing storm actually reached a crescendo in August of 1851. In the warm August of 1851, beneath the expansive skies of Oregon Trail, a tale unfolded that would etch its mark on the rugged landscapes near the confluence of the Raft River and Snake River in present-day Idaho. It was a story of clash and tragedy where the destinies of Thomas Clark, an Englishman with a passion for hunting, and Cho-Cho Ko, or Choo-Choo Ko, a 20-year-old veteran guerrilla fighter from the Shoshone, intersected in a fateful counter. Thomas Clark, having journeyed overland of the Willamette Valley in Oregon in 1848, partnered with fellow adventurer Jackson Vandervert and others in the California Gold Rush. Their gains were reinvested in high-quality cattle and horse destined for Oregon. By the spring of 1851, Clark, accompanied by his family and several Illinois pioneers, embarked on a journey westward. As they traversed the expansive landscapes, their wagon train, laden with dreams and possessions, became a slow-moving entity, allowing the animals to graze and thrive. Clark's family, including his mother, his sister Grace, and brothers, made the pilgrimage with him. Grace, at 25, drove a first-class hack designed for her and Clark, possibly the first of its kind traversing these kind of plains. Meanwhile, Cho-Cho Ko, a seasoned warrior with the Shoshone tribe, found himself in a challenging situation. Short on supplies, particularly good horses, guns, and ammunition, Cho-Cho Ko journeyed eastward along the Oregon Trail to meet his uncle Deerfly, seeking reinforcements. On Wednesday of August 6th of 1851, the wheels of destiny turned. The wagon train halted by the Raft River for a noonday rest. Miss Clark, Grace, and Hodgson, a 17-year-old brother, drove ahead to prepare lunch. Thomas Clark, with hunting on his mind, meandered up the river in pursuit of ducks. Little did they know the shadows of adversity were gathering. The attackers under Cho-Cho Ko's leadership devised a cunning strategy. Some warriors charged the main body of the wagon train at full gallop, inducing chaos, while others, including Cho-Cho Ko, set their sights on the prized possessions, the horses. Amid the unfolding drama, Hodgkin Clark, eager to defend, climbed a wagon wheel but fell victim to a fatal shot. Miss Clark, confronted by a Shoshone man, resisted only to face gunfire. Grace shielded her mother and was wounded in the wrist, the pain echoing through both of their lives. In the chaos, Grace, wounded and feigning death, witnessed the warrior's actions. Her clothes were torn and her body scarred. She escaped further harm as a dust cloud heralded the return of Thomas Clark with his hunting hounds. Thomas Clark, rushing back at full speed, spurred the warriors into desperate act. Mistaking him for a vanguard of a larger party, they threw Grace down a bluff, leaving her with physical and emotional scars that she would endure for the rest of her life. The main body of the wagon train stood paralyzed, their initial shock preventing swift action. Charles Clark, Thomas's brother, organized a pursuit, but Cho-Cho Ko's band found refuge in a natural fortress, evading capture. Some stolen horses would later resurface in Salt Lake City, weaving a thread of suspicion around the involvement of the raiders. When word of the Clark massacre reached the masses, a series of retaliations begun, specifically and most notably, a retaliation by a man named Ben Wright, when he organized a coalition of miners to respond to that attack. His group marched on a Modoc village near Black Bluff in Oregon and killed 41 native Modocs. Similar acts of violence and retribution paved the way for the impending Snake War, in a conflict that hung like a dark cloud over the horizon. In August of 1854, the Snake River had become a theater of tragedy as native attacks on pioneer trains reached its climax. The Ward Massacre, 21 people killed abruptly. Because of that, and the attacks on the Modoc Village and the Clark Massacre, the U.S. Army launched the punitive Winnis Expedition, and it made a turning point of the relentless struggle for dominance. As the years unfurled, echoes of the Spokane War resonated, and the U.S. Army became the custodian of migration to Oregon. Escorts like silent guards were dispatched each spring from 1858. Yet, the relentless tension persisted, especially for straggling groups like the ill-fated Myers Party, meeting their demise in the Salmon Falls Massacre of 1860, and that actually claimed 29 lives. As federal troops withdrew in 1861 to confront the upheavals of the American Civil War, the torch was passed to the California Volunteers. Subsequently, the 1st Washington Territory Infantry Regiment and the 1st Oregon Cavalry replaced Army exports on the immigration trails, a shifting of the guard against the ever-encroaching shadows of conflict. Amidst the turmoil, a visual journey reveals the Nez Perce Reservation in Idaho, a testament to the geographical chessboard where tribes and settlers played their moves. The landscape echoed the silent resistance of Western Shoshone, Paiute, and other local Indians against the relentless encroachment, a resistance that would soon be known as the Snake War. Yet, the tendrils of conflict extended beyond territorial disputes. As gold mining waned in California in the late 1850s, a new wave of prospectors sought their fortunes venturing north and eastward up into the upper Great Basin and the Snake River Valley. A desperate competition for resources ensued, fueling violent bloodshed on both sides as miners consumed more game and water, and that dug into the Native American lands. In the fall of 1862, a series of gripping events unfolded, setting the stage for a fateful clash between Bear Hunter and Colonel Connor. This saga emerged against the backdrop against sweeping struggles between indigenous peoples and the American settlers that echoed across the vast expanse of the American west of the Mississippi. We've kind of been building up to this point here, so you're seeing the causes of these battles, why people are fighting, and now we're getting into sparking the war. So while the nation's gaze remained fixed on the eastern states embroiled in the Civil War, these incidents unfolded near the boundary of Washington and Utah territories, adding to the complexity of the country. In the shadow of these broader conflicts, a narrative unfolded in this region near Summit Creek, which is now Smithville, when a horse mysteriously vanished, sparking an accusation against a young Shoshone named Pugweenie. The subsequent trial and hanging of this man set off a chain reaction as the Shoshone retaliated, claiming lives of settlers in the Merrill family. Meanwhile, the echoes of the gruesome massacre near Fort Hall in 1859 resonated through the region. A settler company from Michigan, journeying along the Oregon Trail, fell prey at night by presumed local Shoshone. The survivors, hiding along the Portneuf River, bore witness to the brutal aftermath, with Lieutenant Livingston's dragoons encountering a scene of unimaginable horror. A young girl mutilated and left to walk on her stumps, symbolizing the depths of the tragedy. Fast forward to 1860, and the Oregon Trail had become a battlefield in the infamous Battle of the Providence. Elijah Utter and his migrant party faced a deadly assault by Bannock and Boise Shoshone, resulting in a significant loss of life. Reuben Van Ornum, a missing young boy, became the focal point of a quest for justice. His uncle, Zacchaeus Van Ornum, sought assistance from Colonel Connor at Fort Douglas, triggering a dramatic expedition to Cache Valley. The confrontation with Chief Bear Hunter and the subsequent skirmish in the Providence Canyon underscored the tensions that would come to head. As the winter of 1862 approached, Connor dispatched Major Edward McGarry on an expedition to recover stolen livestock, further escalating hostilities. The Bear River crossing witnessed a dramatic episode when the Shoshone breaking camp, fleeing and advancing Army troops, and executing captives. The Deseret News expressed concern about the potential fallout from the executions, highlighting a delicate balance between settlers and Shoshone. The Montana Trail became another theater of conflict when Shoshone warriors seeking vengeance for past actions. A series of attacks on miners culminated in a final catalyst from Connor's expedition, a Shoshone assault on a group of 8 miners near Franklin. As the survivors reached Salt Lake City, Chief Justice John F. Kinney, not Kennedy, Kinney, issued warrants to arrest Shoshone chiefs, setting the stage for a military response. As soldiers from Fort Douglas prepared for a formidable expedition northward to confront the Shoshone, Colonel Connor had designed a plan. Keen on a surprise assault, he divided his command into detachments, ensuring that they met at strategic intervals during their journey at the Cache Valley. The response to Connor's military campaign echoed across diverse sentiments. George A. Smith, chronicling in the journal History of the LDS Church, hinted at skepticism, fearing the expedition might result in catching friendly Indians, leaving the guilty untouched. On the contrary, the Deseret News, in an editorial, expressed hope for the eradication of hostile parties, applauding Connor's potential success. The initial departure from Fort Douglas witnessed the first group, led by Captain Samuel W. Hoyt, departing on January 22nd of 1863. Following closely was a second group, consisting of 220 cavalry personnel, led by Colonel Connor himself, setting out on January 25th. Armed with a substantial ammunition stockpile and aided by the cover of darkness, the soldiers embarked on a journey shrouded in secrecy. Upon nearing the town of Franklin, Captain Hoyt's infantry encountered a moment when Shoshone sought sustenance from settlers. Say that 3 times. Shoshone sought sustenance from settlers. The soldiers' unexpected arrival prompted a swift retreat by the Shoshone, leaving sacks of grain behind. This encounter set the stage for the impending conflict. Connor orchestrated the convergence of his forces, aiming for a surprise dawn attack on January 29th. The cold Utah winter added a layer of adversity, with whiskey rations freezing solid and soldiers grappling with frostbite. The Shoshone, meanwhile, gathering food from Mormon settlers, aware of the looming confrontation but anticipating a negotiation rather than direct military engagement. The morning of the 29th unfurled a brutal confrontation, marking one of the coldest times in the Cache Valley. Connor's initial frontal assault faced fierce resistance, leading to a temporary retreat. Subsequent flanking maneuvers and a relentless offensive forced the Shoshone into a dire situation where they actually ran out of ammunition. As the battle unfolded, Chief Sadwich, sensing the impending clash, observed, quote, "Maybe that's them soldiers they were talking about." The Shoshone chiefs, anticipating negotiation, were taken aback by the ferocity of the attack. The battlefield witnessed a tragic chapter, with Bear Hunter, a prominent chief that we talked about at the beginning, meeting his end. The aftermath revealed a stark disparity in casualty counts, with the California Volunteers sustaining losses and the Shoshone enduring a devastating toll. Survivors, including Chief Sadwich, navigated the harsh reality of the aftermath, striving to rebuild his shattered community. The echoes of the Bear River Massacre resonated as the concluding chapter of the Shoshone Nation's significant influence on the Cache Valley and its realms. Beyond the immediate ramifications, the conflict unfolded as a pivotal moment, facilitating the expansion of Mormon settlements into the northern reaches of Cache Valley and becoming a springboard for further ventures into southeastern Idaho. Cache Valley, once the contested terrain, now bore witness to the unfolding of a new chapter in its history. The friction between the Mormons and Colonel Connor persisted, weaving a narrative of accusations and criticism that reverberated for years. Allegations of harassment against non-Mormons in the Utah Territory and Connor's ambitious endeavors to initiate a mining industry in Utah fueled an ongoing discord. In the aftermath, Chief Sedgwick and his band forged an alliance with the Mormons, a surprising turn of events that saw many members baptized and embracing the teachings of the LDS Church. Sedgwick, elevated to the status of an elder in priesthood, played a central role in the establishment of the Washakie or Washakie, Utah, a town named in honor of the Shoshone chief. The Northwestern Band members, under the sponsorship of the LDS Church, embarked on the journey of building farms and homesteads, paving the way for their integration into mainstream LDS society. Those Shoshone who did not partake in the settlement found their way to the Fort Hall Indian Reservation or the Wind River Indian Reservation, charting distinct paths in the aftermath of conflict. Meanwhile, the arrival of Colonel Connor and the California volunteers at Fort Douglas and their reception in the California community portrayed them as heroes. Published newspaper articles celebrated their exploits, depicting Connor's promotion to the permanent rank of Brigadier General. Shortly thereafter, he received a brevet promotion to the rank of Major General, an accolade that underscored his leadership during the Bear River Massacre. Connor's campaign against the Native Americans persisted through the remainder of the U.S. Civil War, leading the Powder River expedition against the Sioux and Cheyenne, etching his name further into the history of Western conflict. The legacy of the Bear River Massacre, with its complex interplay of alliances, settlements, and social integrations, left a mark on the Cache Valley history. So what comes next? How does it end? The stage is set in 1866, amidst the turbulent currents of the Snake River War, for a defining moment, which is the Battle of the Owyhee River. Earlier that year, the Owyhee River had borne witness to relentless assaults by the Paiute, setting the scene for a clash that would resonate through the history of the Cache Valley. At first light of December 26, General Crook's forces stealthily closed in on an unsuspecting Paiute camp. The element of surprise played its hand as the initial shot shattered the stillness of the morning. Chief Howluck, undeterred, chose defiance and met the soldiers in battle. Taunts from the indigenous warriors were met with a precision and force that left little room for mockery. The swift exchange of gunfire saw the mounted warriors swiftly incapacitated, with the remaining few seeking refuge behind rocky fortifications until noon. When a tactical withdrawal was the only recourse, the toll on Howluck's warriors was severe. 30 lay lifeless and 7 were taken captive. In contrast, Crook's forces incurred a toll of 1 wounded and another mortally wounded. The battle, as noted by Crook, decisively put an end to further attacks from that particular band. So the Snake War unfolded through peace talks between General Crook and Snake Chief Wawewa. Despite the profound impact, the Snake War languished in relative obscurity within the pages of United States history. The Paiute and Western Shoshone, lacking their martial renown of like the Apache or Comanche, failed to capture the attention of reporters during the conflict. Joe Wasson emerged as one of the few to document the war, but the nation, gripped by the American Civil War and its aftermath, remained kind of largely oblivious. Yet, despite its overshadowed status, the Snake War held a somber distinction. Statistically, it stood as the deadliest of the Indian wars in the West, deadlier than the Battle of Little Bighorn, leaving a toll of 1,762 men killed, wounded, and captured on both sides. If you look at the Battle of Little Bighorn, who everybody on this channel has probably heard of, and people who don't even care about Wild West history have probably heard of, that battle, there was only 847 casualties as compared to the Snake War, which was 1,762. The Snake War is obscure. I didn't know about it until I started researching, and I thought I was pretty well read on the events of the Wild West. But it does leave a mark on the Wild West, even though we don't see it. It allows more travel to the West, which connects the eastern part of the United States to the western part of the United States, and all the drama that unfolded in between. In the summer of 1874, a pivotal chapter unfolded on the sprawling canvas of the American frontier. The U.S. Army embarked on a determined campaign with the intent of dislodging the Comanche, Kiowa, the Southern Cheyenne, and Arapaho Indian tribes from their ancestral domains on the southern plains of the United States. This ambitious undertaking sought to enforce the relocation of these tribes to the designated reservations in the Indian Territory, a monumental shift that would forever alter their way of life. The echoes of this campaign, known as the Red River War, resonate through the chronicles of Texas history, etching a narrative of profound transformation and conflict. Numerous threads interwove to set the stage for the military's decisive intervention. The relentless tide of westward-bound settlers converged with the nomadic tribes whose roots were intertwined with the buffalo-laden plains throughout the 19th century. As these settlers faced mounting clashes with indigenous communities, the Army forged a network of frontier forts to offer a semblance of protection. However, the crucible of the Civil War triggered a withdrawal of military presence from the westward expanses, enabling the tribes to assert their dominance over the southern plains in a period of opportune upheaval. The incursion of these tribes into the forefront of national affairs stirred a resounding call for government intervention. Amidst the intricate backdrop of the Medicine Lodge Treaty of 1867 emerged as a beacon of resolution. The treaty created two reservations within the Indian Territory, one designated for the Comanche and the Kiowa, and another for the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho. Eager for peace, the tribes agreed to the terms that held the promise of basic services, vocational training, housing, and crucial sustenance in forms of food, supplies, and even firearms and ammunition to support their hunting practices. This accord carried a noble vision, allowing the tribes to continue hunting in the lands south of the Arkansas River as long as the buffalo roamed there. A coalition of 10 tribal chiefs lent their endorsement to the treaty, spurring voluntary migrations to the reservation as a sign of good faith. Yet, the treaty's lofty aspirations were dashed against the jagged rocks of reality. The enterprises of commercial buffalo hunters scorned the treaty's confines, invading the territory that had been solemnly pledged to the Southern Plains tribes. The swift decimation of the majestic southern bison herds, which had long been the lifeblood of these tribes, transpired with a mere 4 years, spanning from 1874 to 1878. The ruthless hunters perpetrated a wide-scale massacre of these revered creatures, ruthlessly gathering their hides for trade back east and forsaking the carcasses to fester upon the plains. Astonishingly, the U.S. government remained silent. I don't know if that's super astonishing, but they did remain silent, failing to stem the environment catastrophe. This wholesale extermination of buffalo dealt a crippling blow to the tribes, driving them into the clutches of dependency upon the reservation provisions. The pledges and assurances of the U.S. government, though grand in word, yielded a bitter harvest of delusion for the tribes. Inadequate and often subpar rations greeted them, while the confinements imposed by reservation boundaries clashed profoundly with the tribe's ancestral instincts to roam the open plains with unbridled freedom. As the tendrils of discontent wound even tighter around the reservation, a palpable sense of desperation gripped the indigenous populations. By the spring of 1874, the weight of dissatisfaction hung heavy upon these lands. Conditions soured, and a steady exodus commenced, as many Indians left the reservations behind, rejoining the renegade bands that had retreated to the vast expanse of the Texas plains. Whispers of rebellion and resistance circulated amongst the tribes, mingling with aspirations of reclaiming their ancestral lands. In the cauldron of unrest, a figure named Aes Sedai emerged as a beacon of inspiration and a harbinger of conflict. A prominent leader and revered prophet of the Quahati band of Comanches, Aes Sedai wielded spiritual power of great magnitude. His incitement to wage war against the encroaching white settlers reverberated across the plains. The conditions of the time, marked by despair and desperation, paved a way for Aes Sedai's message to find receptive ears amongst the Indian leaders. They were faced with some choices. They could either succumb to starvation or rise in armed defense, and the indigenous leaders swiftly aligned with Aes Sedai's vision of resistance. So a strategy was made. the plan to assail and obliterate a nearby settlement of buffalo hunters at a place called Adobe Walls, a crucial juncture in the narrative of the Red River War. The First Battle of Adobe Walls. In 1864, Brigadier General James H. Carleton stood at the helm of the Department of New Mexico, and he was faced with a daunting task: put an end to the relentless onslaught of Indian attacks on white settlers journeying across the paths of the Santa Fe Trail en route to the New Mexico Territory. To answer the call, the famous Kit Carson was summoned, a battle-hardened figure fresh from a campaign against the Apache and Navajo tribes in the heart of New Mexico. Kit Carson's mandate now resonated with stern retribution against the Kiowa and Comanche tribes. Kit Carson assembled 336 Californian and New Mexico volunteers, bolstered by the presence of 75 Ute and Apache auxiliaries. The decisive moment arrived on the fateful November 25th of 1864, when Carson orchestrated a planned assault on a nearby Kiowa village. The aftermath led Carson's battle-worn company to find refuge amidst the ancient ruins of the Adobe Walls. However, dawn unveiled the grim surprise. The Kiowa, joined by the fierce Comanche, unleashed a brazen counterattack against Carson and his forces entrenched at Adobe Walls. Despite being confronted by an intimidating amount of 1,000, they think 1,000, warriors, Kit Carson's troops did hold steadfast when they had 2 howitzers sending support to keep the attacks at bay. As twilight cast its somber cloak, a strategic retreat from the bastion to Fort Bascom in New Mexico was enacted, preceded by the incendiary act of setting one of the encampments ablaze. The brutal clash had a pretty big toll. 3 souls of Carson's ranks were lost, while another 15 bore some physical scars of the battle. In stark contrast, the tally of indigenous casualties was about 60. The Brigadier General James H. Carleton, unswerving valor in the face of the odds, was etched into history, a testament to courage in the adversity that resonated through the great expanse of the Great Plains, earning him laurels as a paragon of resolve. Now, there are 2 battles of Adobe Walls. The first one involved Kit Carson. The second one, this is all leading up to Red River War. So this is what's happening in Texas, North Texas specifically, that sparks the Red River War. So this is kind of the background of this. The second Battle of Adobe Walls was a decade later, after the initial Battle of the Adobe Walls, when a group of merchants from Dodge City, Kansas, yes, the famous Dodge City, Kansas, followed the path of the buffalo hunters into the Texas Panhandle. Panhandle's the very tip-top of Texas. They established a sprawling complex known as Myers and Leonard Store near the ruins of Fort Adobe. This establishment included facilities such as a corral and a restaurant designed primarily to cater to the growing number of buffalo hunters in the area. The momentum of trade at Adobe Walls escalated further with the opening of a second store in April of 1874, run by Charles Rath and Company. Soon after, James N. Hannaran, I think I'm saying that right, Hannaran, and Charles Rath, the one who opened the store, launched a bustling saloon, and Tom O'Keefe initiated a blacksmith shop. As Smith blossomed, the area was frequented by 200 to 300 buffalo hunters, contributing to a pretty thriving trade scene. Remaining indigenous inhabitants perceived the post and buffalo hunting as a grave threat to their way of life, and in my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of other people, it was correct. They were a direct threat to their way of life. During the spring, the Indians organized a sun dance during which Comanche medicine man Isa Tai prophesied the victory of warriors engaged in battle against the encroaching buffalo hunters. Remember our old friend Isa Tai. In the early hours of June 27th of 1874, a combined force of 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, and Kiowa and Arapaho warriors, led by Comanche Chief Quanah Parker and Isa Tai, launched an attack on Buffalo Hunters' camp. Seeking shelter, the hunters took refuge in 2 stores and a saloon. Remember, in my last video of the Comanche history, Quanah Parker is the most famous Comanche chief and ended up kind of being the leader, the religious leader, and a government leader of the Comanche after the reservation, or during the reservation. Just a side note. Despite the post being manned by only 28 men, including notable figures Bat Masterson, the famous lawman of the Wild West, and Billy Dixon, who was a famous buffalo hunter, Isatai's prophecy turned out to just be an illusion. Remarkably outnumbered, the hunter's superior weaponry managed to fend off the Indian assault. The tales of Billy Dixon's prowess emerged with his alleged remarkable shot inside James Hanran's saloon. And I hope I'm saying that right, James Hanran. Though its accuracy has been disputed, Dixon has never personally claimed credit for his incredible shooting. After 4 days of unrelenting battle, reinforcements arrived, bolstering the post's strength by about 100 men, and that prompted the forces of the Comanche and Kiowa and Arapaho to retreat. While estimates vary to up to 70 Indian casualties were reported, including Quanah Parker was supposedly wounded during this battle as well. The outcome of the Adobe Walls engagement proved to be both a spiritual blow to the indigenous tribes and the catalyst to the Red River War. This is what sparked it, of 1874 and 1875, eventually leading to the final location of the Southern Plains Indians to designated reservations. Most of the battles of the Red River War were fleeting clashes with a few fighters and low casualties, but some monumental encounters stood out. Let's turn to the first battle, the Red River. Picture this. A fateful day of August, 1874. Colonel Nelson A. Miles led troops from the 6th Cavalry and 5th Infantry into the vast expanse of southern Armstrong and northern Briscoe counties of Texas. What followed was a gripping day-long saga known as the Battle of Red River. Imagine rugged canyon lands, where around 650 well-armed Army soldiers boasting Gatling guns and a formidable 10-pounder Parrott rifle engaged in a relentless pursuit of Southern Cheyenne warriors. Incredibly, and despite the odds, the Cheyenne managed to stave off the relentless assault long enough for their families to slip away into safety of the canyons and vanish across the staked plains. Now, let's turn our focus to Major William R. Price's expedition. In a daring move, he led the companies C, H, K, and L of the 8th U.S. Cavalry from Fort Union, New Mexico, towards the Texas Panhandle. A column of 216 soldiers accompanied by 2 formidable mountain howitzers and a substantial supply train as they embarked on a journey across the vast Texas Panhandle. On September 12th, as they ventured northeast between Sweetwater Creek and the dry fork of the Washita River, a tense encounter unfolded. Here, they faced off against a band of Kiowa and Comanche Indians led by the indomitable Kiowa chief, Lone Wolf. A high ridge north of Sweetwater Creek in Wheeler County, Texas, became the stage of the Battle of Sweetwater Creek. But unbeknownst to Major Price and his soldiers, Indian families lay hidden behind the ridge, desperately seeking escape. These warriors, led by Lone Wolf, skillfully distracted the troops, enabling their families to slip away to safety. The resulting running battle spanned 4 intense hours and covered 7 miles of terrain. Now, while Major Price's column faced its own trials, Captain Willis Lyman was entrusted with a perilous mission. Imagine him leading a military escort comprising of 36 infantry, 20 cavalry, and 36 civilian teamsters, of whom only 10 were armed, as they embarked on a journey to resupply Camp Supply, so resupply the camp named Supply, in Indian Territory. On September 9th, as they ventured back towards the Red River with crucial supplies, they found themselves under relentless attack by Kiowa and Comanche warriors. Visualize this chaotic scene unfolding as warriors fired from a distance, forcing the cavalry to maneuver through challenging terrain. Ultimately, they reached a steep ravine towards the north of the Washita River, where Captain Lyman ordered the wagons to perform the famous protective corral. We've all seen the corral in Western films, circle the wagons. As the Indians relentlessly pressed their attack, a fierce skirmish unfolded. Sergeant DeArmond fell, Lieutenant Granville Lewis suffered a severe wound, and teamster named Sanford was mortally wounded while carrying ammunition. Yet, despite the initial assault, the Indians retreated to the surrounding ridges, laying siege to the wagon train. Now, with nightfall, the battle ebbed, but the Indians' intent to maintain the siege was evident. Now, Captain Lyman's resolved as he ordered the men to dig rifle pits, and the circle train provided additional protection. The next morning, with the Indians resuming their relentless fire, the situation grew pretty dire, prompting Lyman to send a scout named W.F. Shamsley to seek the help from Camp Supply. Remember, they're trying to bring supplies to Camp Supply. Shamsey's daring escape pursued by relentless Indians, and he ultimately reached Camp Supply 2 days later. September 12th marked the beginning of the Indians actually abandoning this siege. Now, picture a cold rainstorm enveloping the besieged troops, continuing through the next day. The soldiers, nearly out of supplies, found themselves in a grim predicament. Horses were injured, and 22 mules from the wagon lay dead. In the early hours of September 14th, Company K arrived from Camp Supply with much-needed aid and ambulance. Captain Lyman and his wagons could finally move on, rejoining Colonel Miles. For their unwavering bravery during the battle, Colonel Miles recommended 13 troopers of the Medal of Honor, and Captain Lyman was duly promoted. On that same September morning, about 125 warriors who had besieged the Lyman wagon train decided to regroup south of the Washita River. As they reached a small rise north of Gageby Creek, they stumbled upon a small detachment of 6 men from Colonel Miles' command tasked with locating Lyman's wagon train. This detachment included civilian scouts Billy Dixon, who we talked about at Adobe Walls, and Amos Chapman, along with 4 6th Cavalry soldiers. Imagine these men encircled by Indians with limited cover and mounting tension. Private Smith, who held the horses' reins as chaos erupted, was quickly shot and fell as the horses stampeded. The intensity of the ensuing battle, where these courageous men, except for Dixon, were all wounded. Billy Dixon's keen eye spotted a small buffalo wallow, a shallow depression of the plain, and he made a daring dash for it. 3 others joined him, and together they began digging with knives and creating kind of a makeshift fortification. Outside the wallow, Private Smith lay wounded, and Chapman suffered a crippling leg wound. Dixon's determination persisted as he managed to reach and rescue Chapman. As the afternoon wore on and ammunition grew scarce, their only hope was to retrieve the revolver and ammunition belt from the fallen Private Smith. A man named Private Rath made the perilous run, retrieving the items and discovering that Smith was miraculously still alive, although he was fatally wounded. A storm rolled in, offered kind of an unexpected respite, and the Indians withdrew into the night because of the storm. Billy Dixon leaving the wallow on foot the next morning to seek help of the wounded men. After a brief journey, he encountered the 8th Cavalry under Major Price's command, and Colonel Miles orchestrated their rescue upon learning of their plight. Though all 6 men were initially awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, Dixon and Chapman's medals were later revoked due to their unofficial enlistment into the Army. A heartwarming twist occurred in 1989 when the Army Board of Correction of Military Records reinstated Dixon and Chapman's well-deserved medals. We say well-deserved. They were slaughtering indigenous peoples and putting them on a reservation, but to the U.S. Army, they saw this as a double thumbs up. As September 28th of 1874 dawned, a pivotal moment of the Red River War unfolded. Imagine at least 5 Indian villages seeking refuge within the concealed depths of the Palo Duro Canyon. Remember, all these families are trying to escape the U.S. Army, and they're going deeper into these canyons, and they're kind of finding their way into Palo Duro Canyon. Now envision Colonel Ronald S. McKenzie leading the 4th Cavalry charging fearlessly into that canyon. The scattered Indian leaders, including Iron Shirt of the Cheyenne, Poor Buffalo of the Comanche, and Lone Wolf of the Kiowa, struggled to mount a unified defense. The soldiers captured and set ablaze the villages, including the crucial winter stores. Additionally, they secured 1,424 Indian horses, driving them some 20 miles away from the heart-wrenching cold, 1,000 of them to prevent recapture by the Indians. So they found the 1,424 horses, they drove them 20 miles away, and they killed 1,000 of them to prevent the Indian tribes from capturing them back and using them to hunt on their ancestral lands. After this pivotal battle, the hardships faced by the remaining Indians, stripped of provisions because their food stores were burned and their villages were burned and their horses were killed, and now winter is approaching, many began drifting back to the reservations in the following months. The U.S. Army continued its relentless efforts to clear the Texas Panhandle of Indian holdouts and ultimately bringing an end to the Indian War, the Red River War, on the South Plains. I do talk about this war a little differently than I do most things on the channel. This is the end, as America knew it at the time, this is the end of the Southern Plains tribes. This is the planned extermination of these tribes too. So although I get to enjoy a lot of things, specifically I live here in Texas, I get to enjoy a lot of things about the state, I can't look past that's what the Red River War was, is the final takedown of these pretty incredible tribes. This is the end for the Southern Plains Indians, and they're moved to the reservation after this because their villages were burned, their stores that they worked to help get them through the winter were destroyed, and now it's, even though it was reservation or fight, now it is just reservation or starve to death outside the reservation. So you either have to play by the rules or you're going to die outside the rules. So I do talk with a little more disdain in this video, but it's a powerful message being sent by the U.S. Armed Forces that it's not even about comply anymore. It's you are accepting a new way of life that we're providing for you, and then even that was taken. So anyway, if you hear a little weird inflection in my voice, that's why. I find this war, especially as a Texan, pretty gross, but it does need to be covered. We need to. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, famously known as Custer's Last Stand, marked a historic clash between the united forces of the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne tribes and the 7th Cavalry of the United States Army. This pivotal event, one of the most renowned in the Indian Wars, unfolded over 2 fateful days on June 25th and 26th of 1876 in the eastern Montana Territory along the banks of the Little Bighorn River. At the helm of the U.S. Cavalry detachment was the famous Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Tragically, or triumphantly, Custer's entire unit met their demise in this battle. The backdrop of this conflict lay in the simmering tensions between the Sioux and Cheyenne Indians who had left their reservations in late 1875, protesting against the continued intrusion of white settlers into their sacred Black Hills. These defiant Native American groups, led by the illustrious warrior Sitting Bull, assembled in Montana to assert their claim to the ancestral lands. Following 2 previous victories over the U.S. cavalry, their resolve to fight further hardened in the summer of 1876. In response to a report from an Indian inspector that indicated hostility among the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne associated with Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, U.S. forces were dispatched on November 9, 1875. The lure of gold in the Black Hills was another factor driving the military engagement. Like it usually was, the draw of money was pushing settlers and expansion of U.S. into territories they're not supposed to be in. Lieutenant Colonel Custer, leading the largest contingent with General Alfred Terry's command, arrived at an outlook 14 miles east of the Little Bighorn River on the night of June 24th of 1876. The rest of the column advanced towards the mouth of the Little Bighorn to block potential escape routes for the Indians. Meanwhile, 2 Crow Indian scouts were sent ahead to assess the situation. They returned with a critical warning of a vast Indian encampment at the Little Bighorn River. Regrettably, Custer chose to disregard this crucial information, dividing his regiment into 4 groups with intentions to press ahead with the attack, believing that the Indians would flee upon seeing the approaching soldiers. Thus, on June 25th, Custer's men moved forward with disastrous consequences. Lacking precise knowledge of the encampment size, Major Marcus Reno was ordered to initiate the attack, positioning his squadron of 175 soldiers at the southern end of the Indian village. However, They swiftly realized that the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne forces were far larger and showed no signs of retreat. Reno dispatched a message to Custer but received no reply. Consequently, Reno's troops advanced northward, halted their exchange due to fear of entrapment, dismounted, and engaged the village from a distance. After approximately 20 minutes, with only one casualty and no sign of Custer's promised reinforcements, Reno ordered a retreat into the nearby timber and brush along the river. They were relentlessly pursued by a mix of Cheyenne and Sioux soldiers, sustaining casualties as they fled. Continuing their retreat uphill to the bluffs east of the river, Reno's force encountered a squadron under Captain Frederick Benteen. Benteen had been seen by Custer to prevent Indian escape through the upper valley of the Little Bighorn River. His timely arrival on the bluff saves Reno men from potential annihilation. Although the combined forces were later joined by a small contingent escorting Benteen's pack train, they did not advance towards Custer's position for at least an hour, despite the sound of intense gunfire from the north. This delay led to criticism that Benteen had failed to follow orders to march to the sound of guns. Meanwhile, Custer had planned to strike the northern end of the Indian encampment simultaneously with Reno's southern attack. However, Custer underestimated the challenging terrain he had to traverse before launching his assault, navigating bluffs and ravines. As he finally arrived at a position from which to attack, Reno had already been repelled by the Indians, who detected Custer and his men approaching from the opposite end of the village. The Cheyenne and Sioux crossed the river and pushed into the advancing soldiers, driving them back to a long, elevated ridge to the north. Concurrently, a force of Sioux under Crazy Horse's command rapidly moved downstream and executed a sweeping arc encircling Custer and his men. As the Indians closed in on Custer, situated some 3.5 miles north of Reno and Benteen, Custer ordered his men to shoot their horses and create a makeshift barrier. Unfortunately, this provided minimal protection against the hail of bullets and arrows, and Custer, along with his 210 men, succumbed to the relentless assault in less than an hour. Notably, the Lakota and Cheyenne outnumbered the U.S. forces roughly 3-1. Following the decimation of Custer's troops, the Lakota and Cheyenne turned their attention to the remaining U.S. forces under Benteen and Reno, who had finally responded to the audible fighting in Custer's vicinity. Over the next 24 hours, these forces engaged in a grueling battle until the arrival of additional troops under General Terry from the north finally arrived and secured the U.S. lines. With the defenses bolstered, the Indians retreated southward. By the time General Terry arrived, the Indians had removed their deceased and wounded from the battlefield. However, the bodies of the fallen U.S. soldiers remained where they had perished, many of them stripped and mutilated, making identification challenging. Despite medical treatments, 6 wounded soldiers later succumbed to their injuries. Custer's lifeless body was discovered near the hill's summit, now marked by a memorial bearing the names of the U.S. soldiers who participated in the battle. Although he had been shot in the temple and chest, his body remained largely unaltered, possibly because he was clad in buckskin rather than a military uniform. Alongside Custer, 210 men met their end while another 52 lost their lives under Reno's command. They were given hasty burials while an estimated 60 Indian warriors perished in the battle. Pretty crazy numbers compared to U.S. deaths and Lakota and Cheyenne deaths. This tragic encounter, which occurred shortly before the nation's centennial, significantly shifted public sentiment against the Native Americans. The U.S. Army responded by deploying more troops to the region, aiming to quell the Indians and exact revenge for the Battle of Little Bighorn. It took 3 years for an Army court inquiry to investigate the battle in 1879. During the proceedings, the actions of Reno, Benteen, Terry, and Custer were scrutinized. Testimonies portrayed Reno as a drunk and a coward, while Benteen was chastised for disobeying Custer's orders. General Terry's belated arrival was also a contributing factor. However, the primary cause of the U.S. defeat was attributed to flawed intelligence and poor communication. Both Reno and Benteen's military careers were subsequently cut short. In the same year as the military investigation, the Little Bighorn battlefield was designated as a national cemetery under the War Department's administration. In 1881, a memorial was erected over the mass grave of the 7th Cavalry soldiers, U.S. Indian Scouts, and other personnel who perished in the battle. In 1940, the jurisdiction of the battlefield was transferred to the National Park Service. Over time, public sentiment regarding Custer's image and the Battle of Little Bighorn evolved as awareness of the mistreatment of the Native Americans during America's westward expansion grew. In 1991, the U.S. Congress changed the battlefield's names from Custer's Battlefield National Monument to Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, mandating the construction of an Indian memorial. Today, additional red granite memorials pay homage to the Native American warriors who fought in the battle, including Cheyenne warriors Lame White Man and Noisy Walking, as well as Lakota warriors Long Road and Dog's Backbone. The Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument is situated in the southeastern corner of Montana, near Crow Agency, and is administered still by the National Parks Service.